will start with item 12.04, the Scarsdale High School Auditorium renovation. And whenever the audience settles back down, we'll turn it over to Stuart. I guess they wanted more than a 5-minute break. Oh, Drew, I'm going to turn it over to you when the audience settles down.
That's the sound of excitement for the presentation.
Yes, everybody's eager to see what's going to be. Thanks, Drew.
We do have a number of folks in the audience who we will introduce in a little bit. But good evening again, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to share these recommendations for the substantial renovation and refurbishment of Scarsdale High School's auditorium. At the risk of taking a substantial amount of time this evening, we think it is important to present as comprehensively as possible on this topic, given the potential size of the project and knowledge that there is always more capital work on our wish list than we can realistically support at any one time. That's just the nature of the business here. Tonight's presentation will provide some history of the space, outline the committee's work, describe the areas reviewed and considered for renovation and refurbishment, and share proposed improvements. We will also make a recommendation with associated financial considerations and funding options. You will hear from Stuart, you'll hear from Ken Schupner, you'll hear from me, but you'll also get to hear from some of our students, faculty, and Principal Bonamo via video we will share shortly. Getting to this point tonight has been a journey, not just for those on the committee and those in this room tonight, though many of you have been travelers along this road, but one that has really spanned generations of Scarsdale students. Frankly, the origins and history of this space have echoes of, dare I say, Frankenstein, as it has been pieced together over decades in an attempt to transform it from its original purpose as a gymnasium, essentially, into a proper performance and listening space. Make no mistake, there has been real progress over time, and there have been real commitments to this transformation. However, I think an argument can be made that this is now the first time a fully comprehensive assessment has taken place that envisions a modern learning, performing, and listening space that the entire community can enjoy and be proud of. On to that history. We're really thinking of history in three parts. There is a past that goes back to the 80s and even before. There is some recent work that has been accomplished, and there's what we're going to propose tonight in terms of the options there. Going back to 1938, the auditorium was originally built as part of the high school expansion, and it was designed as one of those hybrid words, a gymnatorium. I can't even say that properly. And acted primarily as a gymnasium. One of the consequences of that is acoustics and lighting were not really part of the thought process. In the late 50s, conversion began to a more permanent auditorium as gymnasiums were added to other parts of the physical plant. In the early 80s, significant renovations included the removal of the mezzanine, ceiling clouds. If you're familiar with the space, you'll know what we're talking about, but we will show a picture. And wood paneling was installed and seats were added, bringing us to the current capacity of just under 770 seats. And in the mid-2000s, the orchestra lift was installed with some improvements to sound and lighting, and also stage woodwork refinishing and some curtains and rigging work. As some of you may know, in 2014, as part of the proposed bond, there was a scope of work at about $1 million at the time to handle some water mitigation, intrusion, new seats, house lights, aisle lights, soundboard, processor, and wireless microphones. Unfortunately, only the mitigation of water was actually ultimately included in the final scope of work. We'll touch on that a little bit. And associated, with the costs that were tied to other parts of the project, including the design lab, Edgewood's library addition, and renovation of the Heathcote multipurpose room. Okay, so before I turn it over to Stuart, the more recent part of this work has been the work of various configurations of a committee, many of whom are in the room tonight. When the work was unable to be accomplished in the 2014 bond, the committee has met to continue to study potential improvements and to make annual budget recommendations in an attempt to deliver on those original promises. Some items have been included over the past years, and the committee has included representation from a variety of different stakeholders. Through the concentration of this group and thinking hard about the work, becoming familiar with the space, doing outside research, we really identified and prioritized the improvements, renovations, refurbishments based on three major themes, and those themes will run through the presentation tonight. The first is an enhanced modern student learning experience. That's our mission, and that's what those recommendations will be connected to. Second is an audience experience that's well matched to the uses of the space. And the third is attention to safety and access, sort of a constant in our improvements that we make over time. So this slide shows some of the more recent board meetings where some of these auditorium discussions took place. We can go back to even further than this, but in October of 2020, we discussed the scope of work related to the rigging improvements. In March, 2 meetings in March of 2021 was where we discussed these 2 phases of work, the rigging that ultimately got done, and phase 2A that was related to lighting. You can assume through the naming of that phase as Part A that there was thought about a Part B, or maybe even beyond that. There was awareness that a next phase of work, which would involve seating and so forth, at that time in March of 2021, we were looking at an estimate of about $920,000 with no particular plan in place of how that would get done. So you will see that work in this scope tonight. And then a recognition, and this quote is from that presentation, this in this text box here, that beyond the $920,000 of work, other work more recently identified but not included in the original scope would include acoustical improvements. That was never fleshed out before now. In October of 2021, so in the next school year, there was a review of those phases, 1 and 2A, and then October of this year, just a month and a half ago or 5 weeks ago, you saw the first review of what we're going to describe in more detail tonight. So it's just a little review of the time we've spent discussing this around this table. And can I turn it over to you, Stuart, for this summary?
Absolutely. So a summary of going from the 2014, this slide really shows the origination of the work, whether it came from the bond scope planning committees or those post-bond committees that Drew spoke of, what those scope items were, where that final source of funding came from. You can see only that top line item, the courtyard drainage water mitigation, came from that 2014 bond, and then the current status. So the house lights replacement originally planned as part of that bond scope, along with the sound improvements as well, and some electrical improvements. Eventually, we've made it pretty far down the list in that sort of piecemeal approach. And then as we shared last year, we were beginning to study other types of improvements, which really became evident once we sort of dug into the auditorium a little bit more with those different lenses that Drew mentioned. The current core membership, you can see as presented, broad-based, myself, Dr. Patrick, Ken Bonamo has been on the post-bond committee since 2015, and of course was part of those original bond committees prior to 2014 in preparation for the bond. Lisa Forte is relatively new in this role. Previous to that, we had her predecessor, Craig Sherman. Mike Patera and John Trenholm, previous to Mike, as part of this committee. Nick Ferraro, who's also here this evening. Chris Welsh, before him, it was Chris Renino on this committee. Dr. David Graybill has been truly tremendous. He's here this evening, bringing a career of knowledge and helping us understand what this theater can and cannot do. And prior to David, we had two previous versions of Dr. Graybill. Laura Galblum, parent representative, who also here this evening, and architect Ken Schupner is here, along with Tracy Hansen from BBS. So the auditorium utilization, if you're part of the district, you know, a lot goes on in that space. It's just not what we show up for musicals or concerts. There's constant student meetings, student-led performances throughout the spring, different types of ceremonies, lectures throughout the school year, throughout the school day, and evenings as well. And audience members are everyone, students, parents, grandparents, residents. We host many non-district, or I should say regional type events as well, where non-residents come into this space. So when we started looking at the auditorium, we knew we had to take a look at comparable school districts. And so Dr. Graybill and Lisa Forte, really the most traveled, and getting out to those regional events, had the most experience. And you can see that there have been, in like comparable districts, that many of the aging auditoriums have been improved in recent years. A lot of focus on the acoustics, of course, seating, lighting, and rigging systems. We also did some survey information. I would say not as much of a response as we would have hoped for, but it was not for lack of effort. Dr. Graybill led that effort last spring in gathering responses, and you can see some of the results of that work where people talked about the stage floor, lighting position improvements, ceiling repairs, and of course the seating replacements as well, and our carpeting. So what are the areas of review we broke this into? And you can break it into all sorts of buckets as we look at this work. But what we wanted to do is sort of look at it by space and maybe the experience. So acoustics, house area, the rigging, the lighting, backstage area, performance area, audience sight lines, and water mitigation. And again, how are we going to evaluate these key components? Focusing on the student learning experience, the audience experience, and then of course safety and access is always something we need to be concerned about. So acoustics, the number one thing we did, well, really getting that feedback and through hearing from audience members that's an issue, is we went and hired an acoustical consulting company, Acoustic Distinctions, to conduct an acoustical study of the space and to make recommended improvements. That was attached to this board agenda item. The study confirmed the acoustic deficiencies in the room's design, the cloud design and configuration, and found acoustic dead spots in the room. I believe the acoustical center of the space was actually stage right, up on the stage itself and not down in the house. Due to the current acoustical model, the auditorium is auditorially unavailable at about 15 feet from the lip of the stage, which means that a person speaking at normal volume and normal diction is unintelligible in the 8th row from where a performer normally stands on stage, and then thus negatively impacting the audience experience. The house area, if you've been in the auditorium lately and took a peek up to the ceiling, you will notice that it is deteriorating and disintegrating. If you can sort of make it through the acoustic clouds. The acoustic clouds are acoustically ineffective and aesthetically outdated, and they're no longer used as a standard practice. The seating, it is in disrepair. It was one of those items left over from the 2014 bond scope that did not get completed. And also the repouring of the concrete, it's cracked in many areas, and that would need to be repoured. If you think about one of the reasons sort of we are where we are, and the thought of how can we phase the project again, as we thought about the seating, it sort of started, to pull that string a little bit, knowing that the ceiling needed to be repaired and that the clouds were not really viable anymore. Matter of fact, hindering the sound. You shouldn't really do the seats and then a year later go up and do repair work on the ceilings. It's really out of order. So the sequencing of the work is critical. If you have plans on doing all items listed, you should do them at the same time. Also in the house area is the wood paneling. It's deteriorating with sections missing and damaged. If I'm correct, Mike Patera, as a young man back in the 80s, actually worked on that wood paneling. It was an in-house project. So great work, Mike. But it is the wood paneling only is dated. And the carpet, thank you. And the carpet, again, it is fraying and torn. It really is at the end of its life. And accessibility to the stage itself, it's asymmetrical and lacks optimal function. We have like a temporary set of stairs on stage left, the right-hand side of the stage as you look at it. It's not functional to provide access, especially to many of the ceremonies that go on in that space. So it certainly impacts the audience experience and it limits accessibility. Rigging, we were fortunate to do the major rigging behind the curtains as part of phase one. That was one of the items that I identified when I came here as the number one thing we should take care of for safety concerns. However, we have some ongoing concerns. The catwalk, it is limited for student use and potentially a safety concern. You have to sort of crawl along it in certain spots. And it does not allow students to access the lighting properly as far as an instructional viewpoint. And it also, at the same time, doesn't allow the lighting to be focused properly or to show that full sort of 360 lighting from the spots that they're currently in. The tormentor bars, again, are inaccessible to students and adults, so lighting instruments on one side cannot be focused, serviced, or used effectively, again, impacting the student experience and the audience experience from what they see on the stage. In the lighting, fixtures we did address, which was fantastic. A lot of LED, I think all LED. Dr. Graybill was instrumental in making sure we actually purchased the most effective ones that we did. We actually cut back on some of our purchases after his evaluation, which was excellent. However, they're not currently in the correct location to provide that full lighting experience, again, for both the students and audience. In the backstage area, if you have thespians in your family who have been part of shows, the dressing rooms are very limited. We have a single dressing room with limited bathroom accessibility and limited costume storage. So certainly impacting student experience and accessibility in this area. And the performance area, the stage floor, significant aging, wear and tear, splintering and erosion of the surface, and it does present safety concerns. And also some performance concerns as we move different props across the stage. We've reported back that's not balanced, and I think you'll hear that perhaps in the video. Audience sightlines, we heard from community members that the view from the seating areas is limited and challenging, especially perhaps for orchestral or band events. So it's not really steep enough to provide a clear viewing angle. We looked at some different design alternatives and some platform solutions. So it is an audience experience that's currently negatively impacted by that space. And then I believe finally, water intrusion. So it continues to be an issue. Although the 2014 resolution did lessen the amount of water in the underneath the stage, that's still a concern, and more particularly in two specific areas. One, over the band room, there's a 1970s vintage roof that does leak into the band room area. And then there's an area backstage and way in the back that's actually a wonderful storage space that we do get water intrusion in, which impacts the use of that space. We've done pretty much all we can do in-house over the last couple of years, and it's anticipated that it would take a bigger project to fix that space to limit the water. So I think, so that's it. So next up is the video. So I'd like to thank Dr. David Graybill and Michelle Verna worked on this, along with Mike Leone, our video and audio specialist, for putting this video together, which sort of gives you more of a firsthand experience from our students and teachers and Dr. Graybill.
Hi, my name is Jan Reese.
My name is Sora Oba.
Andrew Lewis.
My name is Eve Rich.
Maria.
My name is Camille Lombard.
My name is Orina Budova.
My name is Barbara Malecki.
I'm Amadei Williams.
I've been involved in theater since 3rd grade. I love kind of the magic of it.
For a few years I wanted to do theater tech.
I was in Clue, which was the spring play of 2022.
I actually didn't see any of the events. I was either performing or working on the soundboard.
I'm mostly doing backstage.
I stage managed Spelling Bee and Clue.
Willy Wonka.
Clue, and I'm working on Willy Wonka now.
Clue and Willy Wonka and Spelling Bee.
I have seen many events in the auditorium.
I am here constantly.
Like every day.
I'm here a lot.
I am here all the time.
Once a week.
Most days after school.
Every day for all of my classes, as well as all of the drama club's rehearsals.
This is actually my 16th year teaching the district. So I have quite a bit of experience performing in the auditorium.
I understand that there are a bunch of broken seats and some seats that don't fold up properly.
There's a lot of seats where it's like a random seat and you sit down and it's like, oh, that one's broken, gotta go on another one. I would say that replacing the carpet in the auditorium is one of the most important things. I feel like it's pretty gross right now.
The one aspect of the hall that I hope is addressed the most are the acoustics of the hall. And from the reaction I get from the audience members that are there, that the acoustics really need to be improved and thought about.
When we move scenery with the imbalance in the floor, it feels like pieces, large set pieces, could actually fall while they're being moved.
The spotlight catwalk is maybe 3 feet tall. It's really hard to crawl around in there. Sometimes it hurts.
There's some lights that we can't really reach.
The dressing room is very small. It doesn't have an AC in it. It gets very smelly very fast.
The wiring of this place could be made better.
Different varieties of lights would be really useful.
The lighting is a #1 priority for me. In order to compete with the surrounding theatrical organizations that students often choose over joining the drama club here. We need to be able to have the technical elements that they have, and we just do not compete. And a huge part of that is the lighting.
The entire community will benefit from the renovation of the auditorium. It is really the heart and center of the whole school, and it's really important that visitors coming to our school have the impression of Scarsdale that we should have. So I'm extremely excited that we are on the cusp of renovating our auditorium. I've also visited nearby schools and I've watched them renovate their performing spaces. The projects nearby have turned out beautifully, and I suspect that ours will as well.
I think that this renovation is important, and it gives hope to all of our drama club students and helps us compete with the outside theatrical organizations. So thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Dr. David Graybill. I am the Scarsdale High School Technical Theater Director and Theater Coordinator. I'm in charge of this space, and we're going to currently take a walk through the high school auditorium and see what's under renovation. As you walk through in here, you get a nice wide open view of our auditorium. You can see a lot of things need help. The main areas that we're talking about replacing here in the auditorium are one, the aesthetics of the ceiling. We're actually thinking about or trying to get those acoustic panels taken off of the ceiling so that we can actually have a clean roof and bring that up to date. The next thing is to actually repair and replace a lot of the auditorium seats. And then the last one is to sort of re-pour the concrete and redo the carpeting here on the floor. So everything just sort of needs renovation, as it were. Here on the floor, you can see a wonderful example of our roof caving in. If you look, if this is a direct result of that, you can see all the original plaster just falling right in. And it goes all the way, it spans the complete length of this auditorium. You know, who wants to be in an auditorium where the roof's falling in? We also have seats that aren't exactly still well constructed. These things all sort of pop out at one point or another. As well as it's got tears, it's got, there's any number of these things that do not no longer work. What is supposed to happen is that these are supposed to bounce back up, but you can see plenty of these seats. The springs have just stopped working. Here we are on stage. Behind me you see the set for the fall musical, and what you'll see all across this are cracks, divots. What we're asking for a new floor is our panels that can actually be replaced, can be repaired as time goes on. Right now, we can't have students walking across here barefoot. Should we replace this floor with something like MDF board, we could start having dance performances here. Having a lot more happen on this floor safely than we can currently. Here we are on the catwalk, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to make this area effective and safe for student use. We do have a pathway here that you can crawl along, and you can adjust the lighting instruments as we have them up here, and we actually have 2 spotlights down here at the middle of the catwalk. However, as you can see, this is a very, very small area. Definitely very difficult to use by students, almost unusable by anyone else's standards. This is the one and only dressing room. It's a nice space. If we had 2 of them, it'd be better. This is our costume hallway, as it were. That's as big as it gets. So we have about 4 racks worth of costumes that we can store. After that, then these things just start to sort of demo way. This leads us into our prop hallway. We have a costume hallway, and we also have a prop hallway. The things we've been doing right in the first phase of this renovation was to fix all of the arbor system here. And what we've managed to do is replace all of our locking systems, which are right here, all of the rope, make sure that all of these arbors are actually up to code. We've got a lot of new microphones, a lot of new sound cables, and we're just constantly updating our system. Our new soundboard, this is the Yamaha ZL5. This is a beautiful, brand new, professional grade soundboard for the students to use. So a lot of stuff has been done so far, but there's so much more to get done to update this from the last time it was renovated. I think it was in the 1980s that all of this stuff was updated. So it was high time that Scarsdale High School got a big upgrade.
Renovating the auditorium has been a project on our docket for nearly a decade now at this point, and we have tried what we could to include smaller portions of a much larger vision along the way, but now we have the opportunity to do the whole thing at one time, which is the best for our students and the community, and we're excited about this project. For good reason, the Scarsdale community is proud of the high-quality education we provide our students. There does come a time, and this is one of them, where investments in facilities have to match the ongoing investments we make in education to ensure that the efforts of our students and staff members are housed in facilities that celebrate their hard work and are in keeping with the level of performance that they expect. We've been working on these plans for some time, and I'm confident that this renovation will be spectacular and will provide all members of our community, most importantly our students, but also our parents, members of the community, and our faculty and staff, with an outstanding experience as audience members, as members of theater performances, as members of musical performances, and will provide the community with something to be very proud of. With so many demands in our school budget, I understand the significance of this investment, and I thank you for your consideration and support of this important project.
Okay. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Schupner. Ken?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you. Great presentation so far. I appreciate everyone's participation in assisting us in determining the scope of work and being able to present the proposed improvements to you tonight. So some of what we're going to show you and describe to you will be reiterated from what you already saw, but we'll also go into some further details on how we're resolving some of those issues for you. As you can see, there's an image here of the existing conditions. As noted previously, this work was performed about 1977, 1980, in that approximate time frame. So we've discussed some of the existing auditorium uses and conditions. Various ensembles take place in the auditorium. The room was identified as acoustically poor from the consultant, and it's not really well suited for any specific performance type. Some of its deficiencies are related to room size, volume, and the room shape, and finishes, all impacting different aspects of the performances. Starting with the ceiling, acoustical tile over plaster is above the circular discs that you can see there. Right now there's transparent discs above the stage where sound reflectors should be installed. And all of these components provide a reduced volume of the space, which is a detriment to its acoustic performance. The walls are parallel, smooth gypsum above smooth wood panels, as you can see in the image. These materials and this configuration causes flutter. The floors are carpeted aisles and painted concrete below the seats. Spatially, the room is long and narrow, which creates less visual and acoustical intimacy. And the catwalk, as you saw in the video, is difficult to traverse. Some of the interior finishes that we'll also be looking at replacing are the seats, the carpet, the wood floor, and a fresh coat of paint, as all of those items are damaged, worn, and at their end of useful life. So it kind of summarizes some of the existing conditions. So here's the interior rendering of the proposed renovation, which addresses all of the aesthetic and acoustic concerns. We'll get into some further details as we progress with that. So a little sneak peek. Recent auditorium improvements. I can't read that, so I'm glad I printed a copy. As David described, there were safety improvements to the existing rigging system. This included replacing the locking rails, replacing the tension floor blocks, replacing cable lift lines and terminations, remove wire rope clips acting as arbor stops and replace with the appropriate stop frames, training for counterbalancing of the line sets, repair the fire curtain release, add batten safety caps, label all line sets and rebalance 3 of them specifically, resecure the orchestra shell, armature clamps, and provide motorized controls for the theatrical lighting line sets. So all of that work was part of that Phase 1 scope of work, which was identified in a rigging report prepared by the district. Phase 2A, in addition to Phase 1, there were sound system improvements where we replaced the sound mixing control, new handheld and wireless microphone equipment, and also a new assisted listening components for the audience. Phase 2A, which is currently ongoing, was theatrical stage lighting improvements, which replaced the architectural controls for the house lights and dimmer rack relays, and replaces incandescent theatrical light fixtures with new modern LED fixtures. And lastly, as described, there was an acoustic analysis and recommendation. Acoustic distinctions came, met with our office, met with users of the auditorium. They performed acoustic testing in order to analyze reverberation, analyze flutter, analyze noise control, so various aspects of the space in order to make recommendations for improvements. Improvements benefiting the student learning experience, as we talked about, reconfigure the catwalk supports for better walkability, provide secure access to the Tormentor light bars, relocate the front of house theatrical light fixtures to the catwalk for student access and focus, replace deteriorated uneven rear stage flooring, new permanent stairs to access the stage, dressing room renovations, and an ADA lift in the rear corridor to provide appropriate access to that dressing room area. Improvements benefiting the audience experience. Those improvements include acoustic performance of the room to support both theatrical and music activities, including school assemblies, spoken word versus robust sound, flexibility to tune the room to be to the specific type of performance, replacement of auditorium seating and installation of new carpet at the aisles, new traditional interior finishes, new permanent stairs to access the stage, new sound system speakers, and stage curtain repair and cleaning. Right now you have a motorized Venetian curtain as your proscenium. Unfortunately, that curtain and motor have not been functioning, so we've included those repairs and cleaning in this project also. So again, here's an image of the existing conditions. And here you'll see the proposed rendering, which includes all new interior finishes. What you'll see here is an upper acoustical curtain above the wood paneling. Tracy will get into a little bit more description about how we've utilize some of the acoustical materials and components to develop this traditional appearance for the space. You can go one more for me, Drew. Here, you'll see the same room where the curtains have been retracted. So that's part of the acoustical tuning that the room will now be able to accommodate in order to benefit each of the specific functions. So going back to my initial list of the deficiencies, how are we going to make the room better for you guys? Well, we need to maximize volume. In order to maximize the volume, we're going to remove the ceiling discs and the plaster ceiling above. We need to improve the liveliness, which is measured by reverberation, by installing these tuning curtains. The tuning curtains provide acoustic flexibility to accommodate multi-use performances. For orchestra and choral music, which requires a more reverberant type of experience, the curtains would be retracted, which represents this configuration. Musical theater and school assemblies is less reverberant to enhance clarity and intelligibility of the spoken word, where the curtains would be extended. I spoke a little bit about flutter before. That's caused by the room walls being parallel and smooth. So in order to reduce flutter echo, we eliminate the flat plane parallel side walls. And that's done by creating the architectural horizontal shelf, which is the area that separates the painted surface from the wood below, and using manufactured diffusive wall treatments below. How do we improve sound transmission? In conjunction with the existing stage extension, concert towers, and concert ceilings, we'll install proscenium shaping and cheek walls. We'll describe how we've modified the configuration of your proscenium to help extend the sound into the audience. There was a mention before about only being presented 15 rows past. These improvements help with that. Sound reflector above the proscenium opening. You can see we've created this kind of eyebrow and arch. Again, that helps benefit the spoken word and the musical or instrumental use of the space in order to extend those sounds further into the audience. Intrusive noise reduction and isolation. We'll do that by adding sound seals on perimeter doors, so it's equally as important to not let sound in order to have the most benefit and experience of the performance. We will also do HVAC and electrical system modifications. That would be accommodated by modifying the existing ductwork and how the air is diffused into the space. The catwalk, we will reconfigure the structural supports to provide walkability. Right now, every 6 feet, there are structural supports at the bottom of the beam. So the catwalk between these structural supports is about 74 inches tall. So what we need to do is relocate these structural supports that limit the height to about 47 inches. So every 6 feet, you have to duck under these structural supports. So we'll modify that, raise it, and provide a continuous 74-inch walkability of the catwalk. Secondly, we talked about relocating the front of house theatrical light fixtures to be mounted on the catwalk for improved access, maintenance, and focus. There's also some ongoing work at the orchestra pit that the district has been performing on their own. So those are how we will address some of the deficiencies of the space. Tracy would like to talk about some of the aesthetics and the design solutions that we developed. Thank you.
You covered a lot.
I did cover a lot.
Hi, thanks so much for having us. So I just wanted to go in very brief detail about how we approached the aesthetics of the space, and really it wasn't, it was really addressing the acoustical concerns of the room specifically in the interior selections. So what you have from the floor up is starting with a hardwood base up to a wainscot height, because the flutter echo is not affected by anything below that height. We have a smooth surface that meets a traditional chair rail. Above that is a product, a manufactured product called Flutter Free, and that is specifically the depth to help with that flutter echo in the room. It's basically a hardwood molding of different depths that capture sound and reverberate it back at different frequencies. We took that in combination, there's actually 3 different panels in the room. So the flutter-free is the most vertical element that you see in the room, but we used it to create a structure to break down the depth of the room and creating an architectural language as you move front to back. So we used a slightly deeper product, another acoustical panel to create the columns that you see as you move forward to the stage, and to create a little decorative detail, yet a third acoustical product, which is the most decorative, that creates the column capital, we're calling it, and the frieze that captures the architectural shelf with the crown molding. And what that does is it kind of gives a bottom and a line to the acoustical curtain that's going to be running front to back so that sound doesn't go underneath and you don't just have it kind of flapping in the breeze. So we kind of used, we hope, all these opportunities in solving the acoustics to create an architectural language that holds in keeping with the aesthetics of the school. It was important to have a wood solution and a detailing that really speaks to the rest of the school as well and holds true. So, thank you.
So this image represents some of the modifications we talked about at the proscenium. Right now, the proscenium walls, if I'm looking from here, stage left and stage right, pretty much just go flat. So we've created these angled proscenium sides in order to, again, reflect sound into the audience, along with installing this eyebrow that also reflects sound from the stage into the audience. If you go one more. Here we talk about adding permanent stairs. Right now you have some temporary steps that are removed or placed when you need them. So this would happen at house left and house right in order to provide some symmetry as a permanent access to the stage from the audience. And also we've added a second ramp on the house left side in order to mimic the symmetry of the ramp on the house right side also. I think that's the end of our images. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ken and Tracy. Excellent. So we'll keep moving here. So where did that get us as far as recommendations and, of course, the estimated costs? So following up, and again, these are just sort of buckets where we allotted costs, and certainly not the way anything would be bid out if we got to that point. But the acoustics recommendations, again, removal of the acoustical clouds, the acoustical wood treatment that Ken and Tracy spoke of on the interior or on the perimeter walls, the acoustical modifications on the proscenium, the HVAC modifications, and the new sound system speakers, about $1.9 million. So it's important to note that these are all those sort of loaded costs. So they include the soft costs and the contingencies, construction contingency. Soft costs are the architectural fees, any sort of clerk of the work fees that we might need to oversee the project, any furnitures and fixtures that wouldn't be included as part of the actual project item. And those can add up to a certain, like, what do they call 35% altogether probably by the time you load those up.
Pretty close to it,
Yep. Also for the house area itself, so we talk about a lot of sort of building conditions or refurbishments and renovations. Those interior perimeter walls, demoing and reconstructing them on the entry corridor. Replacement of the seating, a horizontal acoustical shelf, which we saw the pictures of, and the tormentor platforms, the tuning curtains, which are really more acoustical, but Stuart put them in the house area. They're really more acoustical. Venetian curtain repair and clean that Ken spoke of, all that painting, which would freshen everything up. the concrete floor, the carpeting, and of course those stairs, which would make a big difference at the front of the house, about $1.765 million. Again, and these are escalated to a 2024 bid timeframe. Okay, so we inflated those numbers from today's estimates. The next item, the rigging. The big one here is recommending to relocate the front of the house truss power and fixtures to the catwalk, which would improve the student instructional experience and impact the audience experience. And then modifying the catwalk for the additional height for safety reasons, and adding ladder access to the tormentors so we can actually work on those items and provide a better show. About $500,000. And lighting improvements, again, is moving that power and cabling to the catwalk itself from the front of the house lighting batten, just short of $400,000. The backstage area would be taking care of those, addressing the dressing room issues. So removing the wall dividing the costume storage hallway, which would allow us to expand the dressing room space, divide this dressing room into two usable and separate spaces, and then also installation of the ADA lift in the rear corridor for accessibility for an estimate of about $107,000. For the performance area, taking care of the floor stage behind the proscenium, and then sand buffing and refinishing the surface in front of the proscenium but behind the orchestra pit. That's $70,000. Audience sight lines. So unfortunately, we're sort of inhibited by the space that we have. So it'd be wonderful to have a brand new building and you can build everything perfectly. Unfortunately, or fortunately, we have the auditorium. We did take a look at some estimates to increase the rake of the flooring, increasing that sort of the pitch is about $500,000, and you lost, I think it was about 57 seats. So in reviewing that, we did not feel comfortable in making that recommendation. However, we do recommend that any new seating would be appropriately staggered, which would help with the viewpoints. And also, we're still researching performance platforms, which would go on the stage itself for the performers. So the performance platforms would be that sort of non-fixed item. So if we were able to get that, if the project were to proceed, those would be included in those soft costs that we took a look at. The water mitigation recommendation, so the band room, the roof, which was like 1970s vintage, we do recommend putting that in the upcoming budget. That will be a plant improvement item. So facilities, we've already talked about budget preparation, and we do have that circled in our budget. So as things stand today, you should expect to see that when we do the proposed budget in the early, or I guess late winter for the 23-24 budget. That is impacting the band room as we see water coming down the wall, which is not a good thing. As far as the rear storage area, that is a item that we would recommend putting into a future bond. It would not impact the current house or a renovated house of the auditorium. It's sort of separate and stands alone. We can still use that back storage area for some items, but eventually, as part of future work, we would recommend taking care of that. So as part of the overall recommendation, there would be no cost in this proposal. So overall, you can see all those different categories. It adds up to $4.7 million. It's not a small ticket item, unfortunately. Some different financial considerations, realizing it's a very large ticket item. And I talked a little bit about this in the October meeting. The 2018 bond projects are coming to a close. That bond project authorization was just short of $65 million. We only borrowed $63.867 million. We borrowed $1 million less, if you recall that conversation, due to the balance of the over 20 projects coming in under budget. However, based on my latest estimates of those now closed and almost closed projects for that bond, I do estimate we'll have about $2.8 million left over. In addition to that, we have funds left over from Phase 1 and Phase 2A, which we've talked about in this presentation, of just about $600,000, and we have about $135,000 left in the debt service reserve, totaling $3.5 million available. And this is a slide that I showed back in October for those Phase 1, Phase 2A projects.
Which is where that 575,000.
500, yep, this is the 575. So funding options, so I list two options here, and of course there are many options or ways to think about this. So don't think about, we're trying to pigeonhole you or anything like that. These are just things to think about because it is obviously a very large ticket item. So with the $3.5 million available, if the board chose to use those funds towards this proposed full recommendation, there would be about a $1.2 million shortfall. So a possible option could be to include the full project in the upcoming budget or a budget. So if it were part of the 23-24 budget, it could be done as a transfer to capital item, as that's how it would appear on the expenditure side of the budget. And the offsetting revenue of the 3.5 would be a transfer from the debt service reserve, which is where all that extra money would go. The difference or the delta of the $1.2 million would be the taxpayer impact. And that would be about 75 basis points or 0.75%. It would be excluded from the tax cap calculation, but it doesn't mean it's excluded from the actual tax rate and tax levy, right? So it would have a real impact on the taxes for that current year. So it would be non-recurring, you would expend it, and then that tax impact would go away, the budget item would go away, and the revenue item would go away. So it would be consistent with the way we've done other projects. However, of course, this is a much larger scope than certainly since I've been here, meaning the $4.5 million project. Another possible option would be to bond the project. So it would be a separate proposition, the $4.7 million. Within the wording of the proposition, it could say that we're offsetting that amount by the $3.5 million transfer from debt service reserve, and then asking the authority from the taxpayers to issue bonds in the amount of $1.2 million to fund that gap. So some considerations with that. Obviously it would cost a little bit more because you have interest expense and the expenses associated with borrowing, the attorneys, the rating agencies, financial advisory fees, and all of that. It could be included as part of the ballot in 23-24, but it could be any date. Doesn't have to be on the date of the budget. It could be in the fall. It could be in the summer. Whatever the board would think would be best. And then with a larger project, it goes more in line with the thinking of what you would bond a project for. It's a space that's going to last many, many years. Therefore, maybe you want to match the borrowing against the length of that or useful life of that space. So again, there's other options. Certainly, we recommend the project in total just because some of those phasing concerns. But of course, there's different ways we can think about that, and we welcome any input in regards to that. So a possible timeline. So this is a timeline if it were to be included and approved by voters in May via a proposition or part of the budget. Construction documents would be done in the summer and fall of 2023. It would need and require State Education Department approval, which would be fall, winter 23-24. Award the bids in this late winter, spring of 24. Construction commences the end of June 2024, mid-June, and would not be finished until late fall, early winter 2024. You can see how the clock just sort of keeps going. And we would definitely have to consider alternative performance schedules and alternative spaces that, we've talked to Ken and Dr. Graybill about, whether you use a place like SUNY Purchase, flipping the musical performance for the play performances, fall, spring, which might be a little bit easier, or do it in different spaces, middle school, the little theater, or what have you. But that would have to be considered. And I think that brings us to the end. What we've included, so as part of the board agenda, we included the recommendation report, which has a lot more detail behind this presentation, and also the acoustical report. Within this presentation, we had a number of past presentations that we put inside the appendix. Quite frankly, from a personal standpoint, I came on board right after that bond in 2014 was approved. So it was sort of my stepchild. And I was very disappointed that the auditorium didn't make, at the end of the day. I was looking through some old documents today, and I think the original estimate that was done in August, which was the first estimate that was done by the construction managers who had been hired at that point, came in at $3.2 million over the original approval of the bond. So, unfortunately, the auditorium did not make the final cut because it was a standalone item. You could decide not to do it or do it. It really didn't impact anything else. So since that day, I've been trying to continue those items with meetings with the auditorium committee and piecemealing it throughout the years. And this sort of has brought us to this point. And certainly with my end not too far away, wanted to make sure that we at least did all of the research that we could, and make sure that we presented with the board and community. This would be the ideal at the end of the day. And, in Stuart's opinion, any more piecemealing, another year or two out, you're going to be looking at it and say, wow, we really need to do the acoustics or whatever it may be. And it'll always still be wanting until you got to sort of this point.
I would just, thank you, Stuart. I would just add, my learning curve around this space, though steep, it really helped me to understand the journey the space has been through over time, that it really was not designed for what we're expecting it to accomplish. There have been valiant attempts over the years to move it in that direction. Many, if not all, successful, but I think what I hear in Stuart's last comment there is he wants to get the ball over the line and have the Bills score a touchdown. So
I'm not even.
You're not going there?
Not lately, no.
Okay, too soon. But I do want to thank everybody on the committee. I want to thank Ken, Tracy, thank you so much for your input and thoughts. The team is in the audience. They've really put a lot in, and Stuart has carried this close to his heart from his arrival, as he just said. So we are open to questions.
Before I turn it over to you, Bob, I just want to say thank you for this very thorough and detailed presentation. I think we've got a good understanding of what's going on here. So I appreciate all the work of the committee and everyone to put this together. Bob.
So I guess, if there was ever a role that I can play as an architect, and everyone knows that, it would be to comment on this versus probably the auditing report, which was, I didn't know what I was looking at. So I guess I first want to say that I really am very pleased and impressed by the quality of the analysis and the report. And I also want to say that I am 100% supportive of doing this, doing an improvement to the auditorium. But I'm going to preface it by saying I have some serious concerns, and here they are. And it has nothing to do with the quality of work, because I think what you did answered the question in a stellar way. But as an architect, when I talk to a client, one of the things I say, if you're looking at a house or a building, is, do the bones and the DNA allow you to do what you want to do? And what I kept hearing, and maybe I heard it differently than others, was we're trying to take a gymatorium and turn it into a state-of-an-art auditorium. And that's a challenge, okay? And everyone has acknowledged that. I hear that the shape, the size isn't really the size we want. The shape really isn't what we want. The rake of the floor really isn't what we want. The number of seats in a perfect world are not what we want. But the price tag, I have to say, shocked me. And not to say that it isn't an appropriate or real price, but it is a lot of money. So my question is, have we stepped back and said to ourselves, is this really the right investment at this time for giving Scarsdale the kind of performing arts space that they need? The answer may be, this is the best we can do, and this is what we have to do. But what I kept hearing was that we weren't necessarily giving the community the things that ideally we could deliver in terms of acoustics and sight. We kept saying, well, we're able to improve this. We're able to make it better. We can shift the structure, which is a big deal, which is probably why some of this numbers are so high. But there's compromise after compromise after compromise for $4.7 million, okay? So one of the things that was given to us were a little bit of, I would call it, benchmarking to other performing arts in Bronxville and Horace Mann. And I was a little surprised that I think we have a relatively small auditorium, perhaps for the size of our school. So I kept thinking to myself, well, if we were to just think, well, what would we really want if we could do it? You know, let's remove ourselves from being required to put it in that space. What would be the size? What would be the qualities? What would be some of the attributes? And is there a way, perhaps, from a strategic master planning point of view, to deliver that? So, you know, just a little bit, not to belabor it, my background is I'm a strategic planner. That's what I did for a living. So I think you've done an incredibly professional, good job of solving the problem you were asked to solve. But the question is that the right problem to solve? Meaning, have we stepped back and said, looking at our campus and looking at the future, because this is not a short-term commitment, this is a 20, 30-year commitment or more, 40 years, is this really what we want to do today? And I totally accept that it might be what we want to do, because realistically, that's our only option. But it really does concern me that we are taking the bones of a space and we're kind of trying to manipulate it to do what we want to do. And you've done a great job within the parameters. But I'm not convinced, okay? I'm not convinced that even if we spent, frankly, a little more, but got a lot more, I mean, we're renovating an existing space that doesn't necessarily check all the boxes in the big picture for $4.7 million. Now, I'm not a cost estimator. You know, I don't know whether I'm being, you know, incredibly naive about this, but I know you do pay a premium when you renovate something, and I don't know whether anyone has stepped back and said, you know, is this the right solution? And I know that's probably an incredibly disruptive remark to make, and I apologize for doing it at this meeting, but I feel I have to do that because that's what I'm personally thinking. And if we have gone through that exercise and I don't know about it, that's great, but I don't know whether anyone's looked at the whole master plan of this site and said that's the best way to do it. I don't know, and maybe it is. But I think this is the moment in time to make sure we've done that, in my humble opinion. So I could critique, little details about the plan, and they're minor and inconsequential, if we're in order to implement it. But, I just feel that it behooves all of us for an item of this expense to make sure we're solving the right problem. So, I hope that's not,
I think you're right on. You're correct. And you're thinking like, as compared to building a new space, or if there's another space the auditorium could go on the campus or whatever it may be.
I mean, you made the comment, which I thought, sort of triggered it, was when you think about it, you had a gymatorium, you turn the space that didn't quite work into the auditorium, and you build a beautiful gym. All right, the gym you wanted, because that wasn't the gym you wanted. I mean, why didn't you build the auditorium you wanted and keep that as the gym? I mean, why? Because I get it. It was the gym was needed, and more gyms were needed, and it's a priority. But it feels to me not strategic in a really holistic way. I mean, the performing arts are so important. And there's so much potential to include interesting aspects to the quality of the life experience for kids. I love the theater. I go all the time. So, to me, I'm sitting here thinking, I'd rather spend $6 million and get the auditorium I want than $4.7 million. And, you can't always have what you want. I get that. There's no question. You can't always have what you want. But I think until I've seen a master plan that says, Bob, there's no way to do this, I would hesitate.
Can I just follow up on that? Maybe we could put our architects on the spot a little bit. Just sort of ballpark, if you could answer this question, are we getting, to Bob's point, 50% of what an ideal auditorium would be? Is it 75? Is it 90? Like, kind of where are we in that spectrum?
Yeah, you put me on the spot. I think it's interesting, and I appreciate your comments. And I think the reality is we understood that there were physical limitations to what we could accomplish. We can't make it wider. We can't make it taller. But there are quantitative measures that can be done to improve what you have. What you have doesn't work because it wasn't designed well the first time. Whether it was a gym or whether it was an auditorium, I don't know that history. But recognizing that there are design flaws in what there is constructed now, which creates some of these acoustic deficiencies. So I think it's an appropriate response to a renovation. We did not look at an alternative of building something new. Certainly something we can continue to evaluate. Size-wise and spatially, whether we're talking new construction, I know that this is a sprawling building on a narrow piece of property, so I don't know if there's physically space to build a proper 800-seat auditorium. We'd have to look at that further. But I would say with the input of the acoustical consultant and what they've provided to us as input, that you are getting an appropriate performance space for the bones that we have. I don't want to say that you're only 85% or 75%. I don't think that's fair to quantify necessarily, but it's correcting the issues that the space currently has.
But I think we're all hearing, and I think you're confirming what I'm saying, which is we're improving for what we can improve. We're doing the best we can with what we've got. Frankly, I don't know if that works for me, because, if you're improving at 30%, but it's still 50% efficient from what we want. I mean, someone can figure that out. I mean, if I told you, well, what about if we had all of the size and all of those, and the walls were not parallel, and what if we had all that? Would the acoustics be the same? How much better? I mean, we want to return on our investment here, right? So I don't know. I'm not trying for you, I know you can't, put a number on it right now, but we can put a number on it. Maybe not now, but there is a way to do this. And I think, if I were a taxpayer, which I am, in Scarsdale, I would want to know that our homework was done. That someone looked at the plan and figured out, could we switch things around and do what we need to do? It's an exercise. Architects do it all the time. And I don't know. From a future point of view, it feels, again, like we're, square peg round, we're kind of forcing it to do something that it wasn't necessarily even meant to do. And considering the quality that we're looking for, we're not trying to scrape by here and make do. We want to get the improvement has to be enough to make it worthwhile. So again, I don't know what the next step is, but I think we should think about it.
So thank you, Stuart and Ken and everyone who and Ken Bonamo too, both Kens, who put all the work into this, and Ms. Forte, Lisa, and everyone else who has contributed to this project and put so much time into the meetings. It did not go unnoticed how long this project has been going on. And I think that Bob's idea is really interesting about looking at something outside the space. Is there a possibility that exists outside the space? I will say that assuming that we are geographically limited to the space as it exists, I think this is a great plan. I'm also really delighted that we don't have to decide on it tonight. That this isn't something that we have to vote on right away, and that we all have time to mull it, to ask questions, to go back to the team and to think about it. And I really am grateful that this isn't one of those situations where we have to make a snap decision. So thank you for giving us so much lead time as we start budget planning, to think about this and to consider all of the possibilities that everyone brings to the table. So that's a relief to me. The one thing that I had learned at the meetings that I don't think was discussed tonight was that that is very small compared to what you raised, Bob, but some of the colors that are presented on this screen may not be as they appear. I think it was something Drew pointed out. You can look at the presentation or the video on, 6 different monitors. We could each look at it on our own laptop and it would look totally different. And so there will be adjustments, assuming we go with this plan, to the decor. Like the blue walls are not necessarily going to be bright blue, that sort of thing. So at a smaller level, I think there was a lot of attention to those details and to the acoustic work of the space and to the student friendliness of the space that I appreciated. I am glad that Bob has given us another angle to consider, and I am, and I think it's really important, right? And but I also think that this project brings, from a student perspective, potentially the student experience to a very different level from what it is now. In that students who do technical theater would be able to use the catwalks, which are hard to use. Students who are actors would be able to use the dressing rooms, which are hard to use. Students who are dancers would be more likely to be able to do performances in the new stage, as I understand it. And, it seems, and musicians would have better reception by the audience, although it wouldn't be perfect, right? So Bob, you've raised a question that hadn't been asked and that I'm now really contending with, but fundamentally, if it's this plan or some other plan, I think that it's very clear that there are real problems with this auditorium that need to be addressed. And I am really optimistic that we will figure out a way to move the ball forward, to get the ball over the line. And whether it's this plan or some alternative to it, I think that we're moving in the right direction.
I mean, I think as a potential next step, and, one has to manage this properly, but you went through a very rigorous programming exercise, a very collaborative, inclusive, but within the constraints of what you're talking about, which is what you were asked to do. But I guess I would step back and say, as a very, very simple question, if we were building an auditorium today, what would be the right size for Scarsdale High School? That's what I'd want. I mean, and if you tell me it's 873 seats, we nailed it, well, then it's 873. But I think we have a small little window here. I don't think there's any question, to Jessica's point, that we want to do something, and we will do something. I just want to make sure we do the best that we can do with the resources and the talent that we have here. So I want to make sure we're delivering the right auditorium. I guess that's what I'm saying. That's the best that it can be. And, I know as an architect how I might approach it, and I'm not here to, micromanage anyone, but I think it's an exercise that can be done. And it doesn't have to take years, but it could be done.
So I'd like to also thank everybody for all the work that they've put into this, and I'm a musician growing up, so it's near and dear to my heart that our students have a place that they can perform and have a great student experience. As far as this plan goes, it looks like it was really well thought out. I have, maybe a couple questions that as a board member I feel like, I have to ask, even though I would love to have this auditorium. And maybe not for an answer tonight, but just in general, if we didn't do this project right now, where would we spend that money? That's the whole kind of point of the budget forum and the priorities, but it does seem to me like, there's a lot of this work is way overdue, and we have to, get it done. It's a safety issue. We have water coming through the roof. It's kind of ridiculous that in Scarsdale that we have these conditions, honestly. Our students deserve better, and our community deserves better. I guess one question when we're talking about the size of auditorium, a question to ask is, what kind of audience, house seat rates are we seeing now? Are people lined up in the aisles? Do we have a full house? Maybe we don't need a bigger space. I actually don't know. I'm looking forward to going to the high school play this weekend. It might be the appropriate size. I actually don't know. I don't know if anyone. Other questions, if we're staggering the seats, are we losing seats? Or would we have the same number of capacity? I have little nitpicky questions like that. But overall, I think we definitely need to do something. And I guess one useful calculation, sometimes when we do the budget, you do that incremental cost for an average household in Scarsdale. I think that could be useful, if we're looking at a 75, basis point addition for this project. What would that cost the average Scarsdale home? I don't know. Lots of things come to mind, but in general, I think we need to do this work. Thank you.
Ken, are you able to answer any of those? Either Ken, maybe on the seating capacity and certainly on the staggered seating.
Yeah, the staggered seating wouldn't result in a seat loss.
As Ken walks to the mic, I know, one factor, one among many, is being able to fit at least half our student body, and the current auditorium accomplishes that. So we can have a full student body presentation over 2 sessions, right? Half the students at 700 or so, and then the other half.
That's exactly it. You'd like to fit the whole school at 1,500, but that would probably be oversized for literally every other application of the space. So half the school at a time is where you'd want to land, I think.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone who put this together. It was very informative. I totally hear what you're saying, Bob. It would be amazing to build a state-of-the-art, brand-new fine arts center. You know, we're looking at the ones from Greenwich and Bronxville, and they're gorgeous and they're beautiful, and I'd love to give our students that. But I think, in my opinion, what kind of trumps that is what their experience is right now. Like, the ceiling is falling down. They're crawling and hurting themselves on the catwalk. The chairs don't work. So I don't think it's 4 million versus 6 million. I think it's like 4 million versus 20 million. And
I think you're right.
But maybe I'm wrong. But I feel like I don't want another 20 years to go by where our students keep having to utilize this facility. So would love to hear the answers to Bob's questions, but I do think that because this auditorium is utilized by the entire community in so many capacities, it deserves the care and attention if we can't sooner rather than later, is my opinion.
First, I just want to thank Stuart and Drew and team for putting this together. I mean, this is what budgeting is supposed to be about, right? We've talked about for years the piecemeal approach, and I think we always thought to ourselves, well, what is it really going to take? Now we know the other end. We know what is it going to take to do it right, and now we can discuss. And so just thank you for putting this level of work into this presentation, because it's supporting this conversation so we can make the right decision at the end of the day. I have a couple questions that I'll put out there. I don't know whether they can be answered tonight or at a future meeting. One logistics one I know you can answer. The building condition survey that's coming soon. Do you know when that's coming to the board? Is it?
It already did.
Oh.
Yep, it was in October.
Oh, right. Thank you very much.
Yep.
So you can tell a lot going on. So as we think about that, thinking about, what I think it was Susan that mentioned, sort of what other needs are there that are competing for these dollars, right? As we think about not just the building condition survey, which is kind of comes from a state requirement, but also what are the other, I don't want to say wish list items, but capital needs that support students. We've heard things about flexible furniture. We've heard things about different spaces at different schools. So just sort of what are those comparisons? And sort of when the appropriate time is to hear that, it's probably as we get to budget, and starting with that with the forum that's coming up, hearing from the community, what are their asks? But just sort of including that in that part of that discussion. Again, I don't want to put our architects on the spot, but I'll sort of ask this question. And this goes back to a little bit of what Bob was talking about. For things like acoustics, it sounds like we're able to solve some things, but there's also some uncertainty exactly what we'll be able to solve. I mean, back in whenever those clouds were put in, they were supposed to solve some acoustics, and they didn't work. So there is some risk. Can you help us understand sort of what the confidence level is that these items solve acoustics versus we might do them all, and there's always some risk that we don't accomplish what we're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, what I think would help validate that is if we go back to acoustic distinctions and ask them to give us a valuation of the space now, let's call it 30%, what they feel this design could be versus an optimal. And maybe this is optimal. So I think there's a quantitative response that we can provide to you from the acoustic consultant, not from me.
Okay. I think that would be really helpful because, the point that this was a gymatorium, we're dealing with a suboptimal space that we're trying to optimize, and there's just some uncertainty, and that helps us quantify, what the risks are. Going back to the question about the seating capacity, I don't know if Stuart or if somebody else from the committee can just talk about the sightline component was pulled out. I think it was about a $500,000 item. Was it because of the money or because of the loss of the 50 seats that was the primary driver?
is really, the loss of the seats was the primary driver of like the pro versus the con. It just really didn't seem to make much sense. Mr. Bonamo was definitely not in favor of losing those seats. And the loss of the seats are due to accessibility. So you could probably speak more to that.
Yeah, in order to create that, we would go from a continuous slope of the floor to creating tiered floor or stepped floor for probably 8 to 10 rows is what we had looked at. So in order to accommodate that, I now need to create a cross aisle. In order to when I create these steps, now I need an aisle to get to those seats. So creating those aisles and barriers in order to maintain the handicap accessibility to the rest of the auditorium, then we lose those quantity of seats. So we had done a little sketch layout that proved that configuration.
And it wasn't the back row of the seats like right up against the.
It didn't get that high.
Okay.
It didn't get that high.
I'll ask it a different way. Again, I know you may not be able to answer this tonight. Is there a way to, through additional expense, to solve the ADA concerns while addressing the sight lines and not losing all 50 seats?
It's not even necessarily ADA access because none of that would be ADA accessible. We would resolve that at the lower level and the slope floor.
Yeah.
It's just the aisles that become necessary in order to access those tiered seats. I'm creating an aisle next to an aisle in order to get there.
I understand. I appreciate that.
It's hard for me to
I
verbally
understand.
describe, but
The aisle next to the aisle was helpful. And this gets to the point, I think, to what Jess said. We don't have to decide anything tonight. One thing, obviously I would have loved to have more input for the survey, but I think one thing that's great about what we've done here tonight is now people know what the option is. I think that allows people to now opine on it. So, for example, I don't sit in the auditorium myself that much with younger kids. So it's hard for me to know how much sight lines matter. To Bob's point, if we do all of this and we're $5 million later and people come in and say, but I still can't see so well, is that a big issue? Is that trade-off for 50 seats worth it? Is it feasible to what Ken's needs are? I don't know. But it would be helpful as to all the people watching tonight to hear from people. We've heard the acoustics are being addressed as best as they can, but sightlines are not. And from my understanding of reading the report, adding the temporary structures might be a solution, but it's maybe not the most elegant solution or the best solution. So I think for me that's an open question still of how important are sight lines versus the 500,000 versus the loss of 50 seats? Go ahead. No, please.
If we were to do that, increased pitch, for the sight lines, what would the impact on acoustics be? I imagine because it will change the volume of the space a lot. I don't know anything about acoustics. Would it impact the acoustics?
I don't know the technical answer to that.
Are we doing a sight versus sound
Yeah, it didn't
trade-off?
get to the point of consideration to present to the acoustic consultant.
Okay, thank you.
I think one other thing just to kind of bear in mind, and again, this may be totally unfeasible, but if perchance there was a way to provide a new auditorium, let's say the same size but more with the shape and size that we looked on the site, it means we can maintain using our auditorium as opposed to not. So there is a logistical issue with renovating, obviously, that we would have to solve, and there would be some compromises, which is normal for any renovation. But in this case, you really would lose the use of it. It's not like you would partially lose it. So, again, these are all pros and cons. I don't think anyone is saying not to plow ahead, by the way, for sure. I just want to make that clear. I'm not suggesting let's pause and use the money for something else. I'm just, questioning whether there may be a better location for it.
one thought I had. I know the sticker, shock of it might look like a lot, but we've actually not been spending a lot of money in our budget the last few years on capital projects. So, that's, also maybe something to think about. We might just be due.
I just had two other quick questions. The 4.7, does that include the monies expended for phase 1 and 2A? That's just on top of that, correct? Okay. And then the band room roof, the one from the 70s, is it a fair assumption that regardless of whatever happens here, that roof needs to get replaced? Okay. Okay. Those are my questions. I'll just sum up by saying, and I can write these, a couple open items I think would be helpful to understand, some of which are from the community, the people that use the space, both students, community members, parents, teachers that use it. Now that sort of you've seen what this option is, we've talked about what the phased in, do a couple pieces are option. I think this is a great opportunity to provide some feedback. So hope you do.
I'd like to thank my fellow board members for their comments because it's been very interesting to hear what you've all had to say. Bob, I especially appreciated your question and your perspective as an architect. As I sit here and I think about this, I think about sort of the fitness center renovation and the design lab and the investments we've made in other parts of the high school. And I think this renovation is long overdue for the auditorium. It seems we have consensus really from the board on that. I think the question is, what are we looking at in the scope, and then how are we going to fund that? So I think those are questions that are before us right now. One question I have, which is purely just on the architectural side, but we talked about having the ceiling done before we did the seating and sort of this order of operations. When I'm thinking about the walls, is there a reason that we need to do the walls right now? And I realize this is a different approach than everybody else here has taken, I think, but I'm trying to understand what part of this scope needs to be done right now, immediately. And I understand there's value in doing the walls, but is there a reason why they need to be done now or with the rest of the renovation?
Yeah, the walls are the primary acoustical solution to the existing flutter and reverberation issues. So that traditional interior finish was the acoustical solution to that problem, if that makes sense.
It does. I see that you're saying it solves a problem. I think my question is, does that problem have to be solved right now?
Is it like a staging of the
Right,
work?
like you can't do this, it doesn't make sense to do the seating before you do the ceiling.
So I'll do my budget little when I meet with people regarding their budget. So Ken, I'm going to tell you, you cannot do the walls as part of this project. What does that mean for the rest of the project? Does that mean you can't do something else? It doesn't make any sense to do anything else, or certain aspects?
I think the holistic approach of this project, if it were to proceed as the preferred solution, is the way to do it. To come back, put new seats, new carpet, take the ceiling down, then decide a year later, I want to do the walls. It creates an environment within a newly constructed space that just, you're paying to protect everything you just installed or remove it so we can do other work to reinstall it. It's just not an effective way to renovate the space.
Okay, that's helpful for me to understand. So really, it sounds like from the scope that's being proposed, we need to consider almost everything as one, as opposed to looking to ways. Okay.
Yeah, we've had some of those discussions with the committee. Similar questions have been asked if it came down to a dollar issue or a preference issue. But I think the end result always came down to, this is the best way to accomplish this project.
Okay. And this sort of goes back to Bob's question about sort of strategic vision, but the Little Theater is also a space that I believe could use renovation. And have we talked about that? And where are we in terms of that space?
I'll turn it over to Mr. Bonamo to speak to that, because we did speak about this in the committee.
Yeah, the Little Theater has been on our list for some time. I think the major elements there would be getting flexible seating, adding some elements that would be allow it to be used as a black box or a smaller theater venue, and of course adding air conditioning because it's a large group assembly. Right, I think the capacity is about 150, 160, so you'd want to get that air conditioned.
I think it's part of our discussion as a committee, as far as a priority, really the focus was getting on,
The auditorium.
the main auditorium itself.
Okay. And just, this is a general question, but what about our other auditorium spaces in our district? So the middle school, Heathcote, and Quaker Ridge, what's the status of those spaces?
They are not primary spaces to the capacity of the high school as far as a district-wide venue. The middle school, we did address the rigging for safety concerns at that same time. And we did look at the rigging in all of the other spaces as well, just as a concern, to make sure that that was addressed. Obviously, there is work. We did not do a full evaluation to identify work like we did here at the high school.
Okay. And then in terms of timeline for this, so we've got this presentation. We look forward to hearing from the community on this topic. Where do we revisit this again? Like, where in the budget process does this come up?
Can I pose a few thoughts and questions first before we get to that? I really appreciate all of the feedback. I've tried to take some careful notes in my scrawl here. I think you've raised some really compelling questions. I think part of the answer to your question maybe depends on how much you want to think about as a board about directing us toward answering specific questions, some of which may cost money. So we're going to need to have a sense of that. So keep that in the back of your head. I want to remind the board and the community that in Stuart's October presentation, we listed some examples of projects on the horizon. This is not to say this is a list of priorities. That the determination of priorities would need to come through a robust process, which we have not had even as we finished the 2018 bond, where there was a robust process. So that's kind of how we've operated. I kind of lost my track. So I'll just list what was on that slide because people are hopefully paying attention. Middle school cafeterias, middle school library, A school and choice buildings, separate buildings, elementary kitchens for food service where they don't exist, high school LRC suite and administrative suite. It's been on lists for a long time. Room 215 in the high school, Edgewood, full stop, like classrooms, Fox Meadow, classrooms, high school classrooms. Think about if you've been in Green Acres, if you had the good fortune to be there, you both new construction there, but also the beautifully renovated existing spaces, which in my view, turned out just incredible. Those are all things that we put on that slide. As for the question about other uses of this money or other money, totally legitimate question. Again, the determination of those things really is best suited for a robust process. This happens to be a project that has been, you saw the timeline, you understand, it's been in the ether, in the desire of conversation for as long as or longer than anything else in the list, which I suspect is why it's getting the full treatment tonight. I mean, it's just been there, on people's mind. Reasonable people could disagree about whether this is the next highest priority, but right now it is for us. It's sort of where we landed over this journey. Bob, to your big question, some of my fellow cabinet members could tell you I have a very similar big question that I ask them, which is, is this, I think you asked, is this the right problem to solve? The question I ask is, have we identified the problem, or are we just working at other things? But I'm just saying it's simpatico. Like, I respect that kind of thinking. I think it's really important. To engage that question, I think we need to step back and at least examine how our processes work as a system. So, for example, the 7 people that sit around this table change every year. The combination, the makeup. So part of the force at work is the will of the board at that moment in time. That has made the kind of strategic capital plan we would all want, and I would sign up for in a second, needed to be started 100 years ago in this facility, in this physical plant, and it just wasn't. It wasn't, it was a different time with different priorities, and there have been various things. What I can say is since 2015, Stuart and the team have tried to put in place a long-term facilities plan that at least creates the flow of information around what these priorities are, which is why I was able to rattle off that list, which Stuart put on the slide. It comes out of that. And the other big control, and I think it just bears mentioning, it was also discussed in the October presentation, is there's an operating assumption here. And we haven't tested it with this board, but it exists, which is to say our general line of thinking is that the next capital expenditure through bonds kind of operates under the assumption it's going to be tax neutral, that it's based around the timing of debt falling off and filling that hole of debt. Now that it varies, it changes, that discussion is also a robust one. But I will say for me, unless that assumption is tested and challenged around this table, I feel like that's our guidance. That's the guidance that we have to be thinking and then presenting information. I think that's an exciting one to challenge and think about for all the good reasons. But so going back to that presentation, we're thinking about 40 million possibly at that time through a bond, sometime in the October to February 25, 26 timeframe, with work starting 2027. Just to put that back out there, that's part of the bigger picture context as well. So back to your question, Amber, sorry for that long-winded, but I just think there are points to be considered. What's the appetite of the board to discuss some of those bigger procedural things? What kind of input do you want us to get in terms of answering some of those questions? And then we probably would need to come back to you to get a sense of what that costs if it does. So, for example, sending Ken off in thinking about what a new space would be, he's not going to do that work for free, I don't expect. So we would need the board to give us the direction to ask for that, just as an example. So I would think at our December meeting, a beautiful opportunity there is, hopefully you all will have been in the auditorium for the college landscape presentation that night. So we'd have that fresh in our mind. I would suggest an information item that night where we can revisit the conversation, let this digest a little bit and think about that. Reflect on having been in the space, that's a practical consideration. And then if there is something between now and then that we are directed to kind of answer, we would be delighted to do that.
I mean, just piggybacking on what Drew just said, I think if we think that, let's focus on the high school for the moment. Obviously, there's 7 schools, but because we're talking about the auditorium, the building is a manifestation of a vision, of a strategic vision set off of strategic goals. They all fit, it's like a sequence of events. It's not, you don't start with the vision without the goals, meaning we have a strategic plan, it's trying to, it's defining a way to educate kids, it's setting priorities. And I think it just helps us every once in a while. I don't think we have to belabor it, but every once in a while we need to step back and just think about whether the building is meeting that vision. And if it's not, what are the big ideas here, you know? And give ourselves a little indulgence to allow ourselves the liberty. Yes, we have day-to-day things that we have to accomplish, but if you never step back and say, what is that vision? What is the big idea here? You know, beyond our lifetime, if we were to come back in 25 or 30 years, I hope we had a vision that drove this thing, you know? That's really the most powerful way architecture affects people, when you have a vision. If you don't have the vision, it becomes, you know, amorphous. It doesn't have any character or interesting DNA. So, you know, I'm not trying to make this all complicated for everyone, but, you know, this is a fairly big investment of money, and it could get bigger, you know, who knows. So I think if we should do the hard work. I think, you know, we work well together as a board. I feel pleased about that. I think this is a good group to, you know, maybe have a half-day retreat and kind of try and, you know, do it. Just a thought.
Can I ask if the board can give one piece of direction that maybe won't cost us anything, but sort of is like a micro step to what Drew was talking about? It would be great to know from Ken and the architects, not how much a new auditorium would cost here per se, but what have new auditoriums that have been built at other schools cost? So I think Greenwich was a new building. I think it wasn't a reconstruction. They used that space for something else. So I don't know how much Greenwich costs, but that, you know, these types, and I don't know how big it was. I think it's bigger. Greenwich is a bigger school than us. But having 5 examples, so to the point, you know, I think someone said it's 20 million, and Bob said, I don't think it's like, if we could just know the order of magnitude, then we can decide, is it even worth, as a board, asking the architects to answer the next question. But I pose that to the rest of the board if that's valuable.
I mean, Ken, how many square feet is this project? I'm just curious. Do you know? I mean, at a gross level, the way we kind of do these things is on a cost per square foot. I mean, it's not, you know, necessarily the best way to do it, but it is a way to do it.
It's about 6,750 square feet.
So, you know, if you take 4.7 million and divide it by 6,600 square feet, you get a cost.
Somebody give us the number.
So,
Yeah, we
Jessica?
did a more itemized cost proposal here.
46?
I mean, I don't think we need to necessarily belabor it tonight, but I think there is a whole conversation from my point of view about the cost estimate, but I don't really think we need to get into that tonight.
Well, I think Drew's made well, Ron has a suggestion as well in terms of getting costs right now. Is the board in agreement to ask for, you know, existing auditoriums that have already been built and the cost
we've
there?
designed many brand new auditoriums, so we can give you some of our own historical data that may be 10 years old and we can escalate to now. I think some of the figures I've seen for Greenwich was 47 million.
But it would just be helpful to know, like, I don't remember what, if they did other things or if there was site remediation work, you know what I mean? Like, just trying to get a ballpark. Are we comparing 5 to 8 or 5 to 40 is what would be helpful to me.
It's a fair question, of course.
I'm sorry, you said the Greenwich, just the auditorium was $47 million?
That's what I believe.
Okay, that's helpful information.
We'll
Thank you.
verify. We'll verify. It's a big number to put out there, but but it was
good to know.
much. Look, you know how big that one was?
I mean,
How big's the auditorium?
How many seats?
Oh, 1,400.
Yeah, it's big.
It has
Two balconies.
Two balconies. It's
Right.
the width of our auditorium, but twice as high. So
Right. 1,325. Google, good friend. 46.7 million.
Joe, we're just going to put you to work on researching all these right now. So do we still want to ask for other estimates, or are we, comfortable?
Whatever they can give us from.
Okay, I think
It's
it
not a
sounds
problem.
like the board would appreciate that addition, yes. That would be great. And then I like your suggestion, Drew, about putting this as an information item again, so we all have a little time to process this information, have another discussion about it.
Sounds good.
Did you have something else, Jessica?
I just wanted to point out one thing, and the board may know, but Dr. Graybill had said he would give tours. I know Drew mentioned the time that we would be able to spend in the auditorium, but I think Dr. Graybill could give, perhaps he has given me one, but perhaps he could give one to the board in 2 sections of 3 so that everyone could see exactly what we're talking about backstage and some of these areas that you might not see at the meeting on the 5th.
Sure, I think we definitely appreciate that. I also think that video was fantastic. It really did a great job. But yes, I'm sure board members, we can coordinate that on our end. Go ahead. Nope. Go ahead.
I had one other ask. I've been asked, and it will dovetail into a comment. Is it something easy to do? Can you take I think it was 1 million that was in the original bond, and just whatever the factor is to gross that up to today's dollars? Because we're also talking about things from almost 10 years ago, and costs are different. So I think that would be helpful, because I think when we talk about what voters approved back then, it's helpful to know what voters approved. It's also helpful to know in today's dollars what those were, and that's just I don't want to segue into a discussion, but when we talk about things like bonds and tax neutral, I think it's a fair discussion to have one day, because you're talking about dollars that were done many, many years ago. So if as a board you only look at what happened 30 years ago for a bond, that is regression in terms of spending. I don't want to open that can of worms. I just think we've been talking a lot in different dollars in different years, and that's an important point.
I just want to point out, we showed you 50 slides. There are 31 additional slides that are just backup related to previous budget presentations and so on that had costs related to the auditorium. Like Stuart does with the budget presentations, where all the previous slides are there. This is on board docs with those additional 31 slides to that point.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, this was a really great discussion, really great presentation. Thank you to everybody. Oh, go for it,
Just want to add one
Stuart.
thing. I'll say, I believe none of the board members were on board when we hired BBS. But when the board hired BBS for the 2018 bond project, I think one of the redeeming qualities of what they brought to the table, which I don't think the other architectural firms did, was a full evaluation of our buildings through the program that the school wanted to deliver and how our buildings were fighting against them. So I have amazing architect Kevin Walsh, who works with Ken, who went in and spent time in each of our buildings, talking to the principals, talking to cabinet members, and making that determination. And if you recall their presentation on their initial findings in the fall of 2017, I think it was, or late summer of 2017, showed that full scope of work of sort of the ideal in the full study. So I would anticipate, as we look forward to the next bond work, that same sort of evaluation should be, refreshed. Because things change, programs change, and that would provide that study of work, the research necessary to sort of move forward.
Thank you, Stuart.
Yep.
Okay, thank you, everyone.